Hello, this is Alfresco Tech Talk Live for February 2015. I'm Richard Esplin. I apologize for my head cold. Hopefully you can hear me. Thank goodness we got a lot to talk about today and a panel that likes to talk, so I won't be talking as much today. This is episode 83, so that's we've been doing this for a while now. Only have one announcement this month, that our next event is February 20th, office hours with the Order of the Bee. Order of the Bee is an independent group that evangelizes and works around Alfresco Community Edition, and they've done a lot of cool stuff since they formed last fall. They want to report on that, and your questions are welcome and invited, encouraged, so please send them over. You can email community@alfresco.com, or you can post on the Google Plus event page. You can find that page. It's linked from alfresco.com/community. So today's Tech Talk Live is on Aikau. We did office hours 2 weeks ago with the engineering team. Got more questions than we could handle. So we're going to reserve the end of this episode to cover the Aikau related questions from office hours. So we have those listed. Why don't we introduce the Aikau team? Dave, you want to start?
Okay, yeah, so hopefully if you're watching this, you probably know me, you might have seen me at Tech Talk, in the previous Tech Talk Lives and at Alfresco Summit. My name's Dave Draper. I'm in the, what was the UI team at Alfresco. I've been at the company for nearly 5 years now, and I'm now running the Aikau team, which is we're going to be getting onto in a bit more detail shortly.
Excellent. And your longtime partner in crime, David, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yep, and so I've been with Alfresco for 5 years, give or take, working on the UI team. I'm now working on the RM project, which is using Aikau for a lot of its extension stuff. And so, yeah, while not officially on the Aikau team as it is, I'm using it and contributing back to it. So that's me.
Excellent. And David's been able to participate in a lot of the, you'll see both Dave and David in the RC channel on occasion, and answering on mailing lists and in the forums, so great contributors. Martin, why don't you go next?
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Martin Doyle. Joined Alfresco just beginning of the year. I'm working in the Aikau team with Dave, just carrying on with the project as it is. So I'm fairly new, still learning the ropes.
Excellent. Welcome to the team. And Richard?
Hi, Richard. Thanks. I've been at Alfresco for about 18 months now. I've been working primarily with Dave during that time, fleshing out some of the Aikau work, working a lot with testing, funnily enough, so tell you all about that today. That's it. Having fun.
Excellent. Dave pointed out that this panel is probably the most confusing we've had, with a Dave and a Richard and a Richard. So we're glad to have Martin join us as well. I think, Dave, you were going to give an update on the project as a whole.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm just going to give a quick sort of 5-10 minutes on where we are, because one of the interesting things about when we schedule these sort of Tech Talk Lives is we do it, like, I think this was one we scheduled almost 3 months ago, maybe at least 2 months ago, and then obviously things change quite considerably. So I wasn't going to be on the panel originally. Mine didn't even work for the company at that time, and it was just going to be Richard and David talking about where we are with testing, but things have moved on a bit, so I just wanted to bring everyone up to speed with where we are on Aikau. This is sort of a pre-announcement, I think. Brian Remington sort of let the cat out of the bag a little bit in the office hours a couple of weeks back, when he sort of said that we were, because one of the things that we sort of recognised that needs to happen within Alfresco is to sort of begin to modularize some of the components to break things up a bit. And although some of the, there are existing modules such as RM, in terms of breaking up the core of the product, I think it's something that we recognise we need to do. And so to this end, we've been working on splitting Aikau out of Share. So I think it was just before Christmas, not really that long ago at all. We took the code out of the main code base. We moved it to a private SVN branch where we were doing some work, and as of last week, I think it was. We've actually moved the project to GitHub. Now, hopefully that's going to make a lot of people in the community quite happy and show that our sort of general commitment in this direction, because I know this is something that the community has been asking for, and it's definitely a direction we want to go in. So we haven't made a lot of noise about it yet because we're still not quite in a position where we're ready to start accepting contributions. We've just started second sprint. So the way the teams are set up is that Martin and I are the sort of core members of the Aikau team, but as David was saying, that we're taking contributions both internally and hopefully also externally from the community as well. What this means is that feature teams within Alfresco will be making requests of the Aikau team, and we'll be sort of trying to service those requests to provide widgets and bug fixes and that kind of thing, and just sort of supporting the Aikau in both historically and going forwards as well. So hopefully, I mean, I've not really talked about it, but I'm kind of hopeful that most people know what Aikau is. Effectively, it's a sort of, it's not really, it's a UI meta framework, I suppose. It's an aggregate of other UI frameworks, primarily built on top of the Dojo AMD loader. It's built on top of Surf. We do lots of smart code within Surf to sort of analyze and work out the dependencies to make the page loading as efficient as possible. And if you want to know, obviously, know more about the sort of ins and outs of it, then there's lots of blog posts and previous Summit and Tech Talk Live presentations which you can go back through. So I won't go too much into it. I just wanted to really bring everyone up to speed on where we are. So what's going to be happening over the next few weeks is that we're going to be sort of making a bit more noise about the GitHub project, and we're going to be sort of defining how people can contribute. One of the areas in which we need to define is the acceptance criteria, and part of that is going to be unit testing, which is why this is sort of quite a timely event, so people understand their requirements for testing when they make contributions. And we're also going to be releasing a complete tutorial which I've been working on for a little while now to help people get up to speed with writing standalone clients using the Aikau project, and also using a new Maven archetype which will allow you to build a standalone Surf-based Aikau client which is pre-configured to work with Alfresco straight out of the box, and the tutorial will basically take you through using that right up to sort of building a standalone client. And so that's kind of where we are and where we're going. So, like I said, hopefully that shows the company's commitment to Aikau, and also the commitment to the sort of this modularization approach, and also again to closer interaction with the community and getting contributions.
Very cool announcement, and having Aikau move to GitHub is not only cool for the Aikau project, but it's a neat experiment for the organization as a whole as we figure out the right way to move our very large code base and split it up appropriately and get in a place where we can get pull requests.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes at the moment. It's, as you said, it's not an easy thing to do. Yeah, just watch this space as far as the rest of the product goes, I guess.
Very cool. So thank you for that update. And so the topic for the month is testing. And I know that David and Richard prepared a bit on how to test your Aikau applications, your Aikau editions. So we should discuss that, and then we can go to if anybody in the audience has questions, at chat.alfresco.com, you can join the IRC channel where we're watching that, and we'll get those questions in real time. I'm currently seeing a lot of positive feedback about the Aikau moving to GitHub, and Darkstar points out that it's a good step forward towards decoupling the UI from the back end, which is part of the long-term strategy, is to be able to have those on separate release cycles and not have them so tightly integrated. So yeah, so if anybody has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll bring them to the panel. But yeah, David, you want to discuss testing?
I think I'm kicking off at this point now.
Excellent.
I'm going to ask David to get the slides running, and Richard to make that the broadcast channel, I suppose.
Okay, it should be what people are seeing.
I'm not at the moment.
If you've selected a specific speaker, that's what you'll see. If you unselect it, you'll see what everybody else sees.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure it is showing that. I mean, if you are watching, I think the best thing, just to be on the safe side, is to click on the very obvious screen sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so yeah, hi everyone, and thanks for all the introductions. So I'm going to walk us through some of the testing we now do with Aikau and talk about why we've developed the product this way. Now, much of what I'm going to show is already available in blogs written by Dave and myself, so some of you may have experimented with these tools already. The testing is pretty straightforward and easy to write, although, as is so often the case, the tests can take as long to write as the original piece of work they are designed to interrogate. David, can I have slide 1, please? Excellent. So this is sort of the story so far. Previously, we tested Share thoroughly, but because the application was built in a modular but somewhat ad hoc fashion, there was little opportunity to unit test at a module level. Instead, tests were mostly looking at the application as a whole. As we move in the direction of engineering parts of the Share app with Aikau, we now have the option to create unit tests for the building blocks. If the building blocks of the application are already well tested, then it's logical that some of the repetitive testing of the application becomes unnecessary. The unit tests we've written so far are quite quick in their running and are easily fitted into a build process. This is really great because it gives us the instant benefit of regression on existing features. We test the way a widget is supposed to work, and if something changes unexpectedly because of an edit, let's say, the build will instantly tell us that there is potentially a problem. In fact, we have some developers using a Grunt plugin called Grunt Watch, which can run the unit tests automatically and will warn about potential regressions actually during the development. The next slide, please. So let's talk about Selenium now. Put simply, Selenium automates browsers. Although its uses are many, it is primarily used for automating web applications for testing purposes. Selenium has the support of some of the largest browser vendors who have taken steps to make Selenium a native part of their browser. It is also the core technology in countless other browser automation tools, APIs and frameworks. We're using Intern to run our tests, and Intern can easily hit a number of different Selenium targets. These could potentially include targeting an instance of Selenium running locally on your machine, Selenium exposed on a particular port from a virtual machine you're running locally, a Selenium grid running on your network, and finally a cloud testing platform such as Source Labs. Each of these testing routes has different pros and cons, which you'll see here. They're mainly pivoted on whether or not you are in a development phase of work or a maintenance and monitoring phase. Local testing, where you actually view the browser being opened and driven by Selenium, is the quickest way to test during development, but is limited to the browsers you have available and to the platform you are using, of course. Using a virtual machine with a known set of browsers is good for testing across the team and to give a sensible target for everyone to work towards. The Selenium grid may give you options for more browsers that you wish to test against. It comes with a support overhead. Cloud tools such as Source Labs look after the configuration of browsers and their associated drivers for you, and this is certainly a good way to guarantee you are testing all of the browsers you claim to be supporting. Although there are free Get Me Started options, a tool like Source Labs is a paid-for service, however, and the configuration and connectivity is not necessarily without error, giving rise to false reporting. I'm just going to mention an interesting aside at this point. This week we have had trouble running our tests, and this has arisen because of updates to the Firefox browser. If anyone has worked with Selenium previously, you will know that it is an application which communicates with browsers through drivers. As browsers are updated, so too their associated drivers have to be updated, and there is usually something of a time delay between the releases. At the moment, the Firefox driver has some issues with driving the most recent release of Firefox. Now in time this will be fixed, but there may be some overhead associated with making the test app work again. Tools like Source Labs may be paid for, but it is this maintenance that they look after and are therefore worthwhile. Next slide, please.
Hey, quick question for people to see this later. Which version of Firefox is that?
35.
Good to know.
Intern configuration is quite logical, and if you're using the testing framework as checked out with Aikau, you shouldn't need to fiddle with it very much. There are some files you might find interesting to have a look at. Each of the commands we use to run an intern test has its own configuration file. You can try looking at intern.js for some of the configuration. You might like to pay particular attention to the area of the file that is concerned with the browsers that it is expected to run. Please do modify this area during your testing if you'd like to experiment with other browsers. More importantly, have a look for the file called suites.js that contains lists of all the tests we are going to run. During development, we all tend to work on one test at a time, and the easiest way to do that is to exclude all of the other tests in the suites file. Next slide, please. Whichever route you are choosing to run the test, you are going to do pretty much the same thing each time. Firstly, make sure Selenium is up and running. It'll probably be available on port 4444 if you're using the standard installs. Now you're going to build Aikau and then run the Aikau test app using Jetty. Next, we trigger the intern test runner to run through all of the tests configured in the test suites file. And finally, look at the runner output and see if anything has broken and needs looking at. Now, some of these tasks may be bundled together in grunt commands. Issuing the command grunt test, for example, will build Aikau, start the Jetty server, wait for it to return that it has started, and finally run the virtual machine version of the tests. If you've started the test app manually yourself, then the same grunt test command will automatically skip over the start sequence and get straight to the testing. Next slide, please. If you want to run Aikau tests, you are going to need to install VirtualBox, Vagrant, and Node.js. They're all free and shouldn't cause you any problems. In the development team here, we have Linux, Mac, and Windows users, and I'm not aware of there being any insurmountable issues with this stack of applications. Next slide, please. So if you've installed the required software and just checked out from GitHub and want to run the testing suite, what is the correct approach? I'm going to assume that everyone knows what Node Package Manager, or NPM, is. The Aikau project has a small list of NPM requirements, so to start with, navigate to the directory where you have checked out to. You actually want the Aikau directory that is actually one level below the root of the GitHub project. From that directory, enter the command npm install, and when that has completed, install grunt CLI globally, as shown here. You will have installed a number of dependencies, including intern itself, but also utility tools for running services and file operations, things like that. Next, we're going to run up a virtual machine using Vagrant. If you refer back to the list of prerequisites, you will see VirtualBox, and Vagrant will create a new virtual machine there. The command grunt vup, or gvup if you like, as we have grunt aliased to just g, will run the virtual machine for the first time. There is usually a pretty hefty download the first time this is run, but the machine should be remembered and simply started the next time you want to run it. Whether you're running Selenium via a virtual machine or locally, you should get a console you can browse to, which in this case is a pretty good way to see if your virtual machine has started and is correct. You'll see the link at the bottom of this page showing you that URL. With all of our dependencies installed and a virtual machine running through Vagrant, we are ready to start a test. Command gtest will do just that. I'm not going to talk too much about the tests themselves, as David is going to look into that, but I will mention the basics. Each test loads a test instance of the widget or widgets it is designed for by browsing to a page written in the Aikau test app where basic instances of the widgets have been included declaratively. Intern commands are then used to perform Selenium-style actions and assert on the expected behaviors. Included in the configuration of intern, and you may like to change this should you become more familiar, is the way in which the runner reports to the console. As the tests run, you will see output, which will mostly say pass, hopefully. We tend to write small logging messages into our tests to see how they are running and report usefully when there is an error. The test runner will run all the tests on all of the browsers configured in the intern configuration file. I think the current runtime is currently about 5 minutes total when running on the VM with a couple of current browsers. When the test runner has finished, the console will show a summary of the tests and highlight failures. It's worth noting that the test command does not stop the Jetty test app when it has finished. This is quite useful as you can instantly open a browser and look at the test app page associated with any failures immediately. More often than not, the failure is pretty obvious. Instantly, if you simply want to run the test app during development of the test web script, you can just Maven clean install and Maven Jetty run to get it going. The commands we have discussed so far can take a little time to run, so I'm not going to run the whole process end to end to show you, but David has a video queued up which Dave recorded of some of this process. This should give some idea of the sort of console output you might see. This also reduces the risk of an installation fail on my part. So Dave, could you run the video, please? So to begin with, you'll see the vup command, which is launching the virtual machine. As I say, it can take a while. That will terminate fairly soon. That's it started. It runs a provisioning step as well to get all the key apps running. And now we're running a test, so this is going to be pretty quick, but it's starting the test app. And as soon as it has done, it confirms and will then kick off running some tests, which it's doing now.
And Michael Suzuki's summit session provides additional information about testing and how to run Aikau. And I believe there's an example in the Maven project of the SDK for how to build tests and how to run them as well for people that are playing with it.
Yeah. One of the interesting things as well, if I just jump in, is that we've been sort of getting up to speed with the unit testing is something it's been a learning exercise for us really as much as anything. So if you go through the Aikau source code at the moment, you'll notice quite a degree of difference between some of the tests. And so one of the things when we define sort of, as I said, the acceptance test or the acceptance criteria for contributions, we'll be pointing you at the best practices, because it's a case of do as we say, or not as we do, at least not as we used to do. But we sort of, I think we've figured out how to do it really well now and get the tests running reliably, and we're in the process of going back and updating them all. So it is a sort of, has been a learning process for us as well.
Yeah, that's right. So I don't know if you saw the end. As that completed, it basically dumped a final section to the screen which said, I don't know, 120 tests passed, 1 failed, and when Dave recorded this video, he went back and had a look and could see why it had failed, and that's basically what you need to do. Could we move on to the last slide, please, David? So I'm sure this slide deck is going to be shared with the recording, and here are a few useful links should you wish to try testing yourself. As David is about to explain, the syntax for writing tests is not complex, but maybe has a few idiosyncrasies, and reading the intern documentation is a must. All that remains is for me to mention our future plans for the testing. Currently we are using the testing on an ad hoc basis, but we're already benefiting from having it available. We have a code coverage in the region of about 62%, and that number improves all the time. There are plans for the testing to become a phase of the build very soon. Using a generous selection of browsers for that will give us high confidence in the widgets we are building our apps from. I've mentioned Source Labs on a few occasions today. Whilst we have configured an example of intern to work with Source Labs, and we've run it a few times, we have slightly mixed results today. The service they offer is great, and we believe this approach to be the most powerful overall, but we do seem to have some connectivity issues which remain unresolved at this time. And that's it from me. Over to David.
Okay, thanks, Richard. So that's how to run our tests. What I'm going to look at is how to write our tests. So as Dave Draper said, we're not experts in this area. We're still learning. So you'll notice that we're changing how we write them, and that is, as he said, because we are still learning. So just bear that in mind as you review the tests. And as a good rule of thumb, always look for the tests that have been modified most recently, as they're more likely to be good examples than tests that haven't been touched for a while. And I think we're unlikely to go back and rewrite working tests just because we've changed the style of how we write tests.
That's not true. Actually, that's. I'm going to jump in there. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm forcing myself to do just that because I'm a glutton for punishment. Yeah. But yeah, basically, if I get an issue debugging the test, I am forcing myself to rewrite them to the best practices now. I'll keep managing that for.
So did we just hear Dave commit to rewrite all the tests for the entire team?
Yeah, the team's going to rewrite all the tests. That's what I was committing to.
Question from RC. Ol was asking how is Aikau moves into GitHub and is the testing styles changed? And we have the Maven-based Alfresco SDK. Is the SDK going to be updated? Because Michael Suzuki gave a Tech Talk Live follow-up to his summit presentation on testing last November, where he explained how you can use the SDK to write sample tests, but it's not updated to do a lot of these newer items. Is that work that's scheduled?
It's not currently on our immediate backlog in terms of working with the SDK. I think we're trying to establish exactly how we're going to tie in with the SDK. I mean, to be honest with you, it's sort of been quite an effort to get where we are now, and we're just sort of trying to close out some of the infrastructure points. And I think once we've got that and we've got everything stable and running, then we can look to sort of go back and look at how we tightly integrate with the SDK again. But we've got to get some of the basic setup sorted out first on GitHub, and then we're not quite there yet.
So next time Ol gets a week without family duties, we'll ask him to do some pull requests.
Yeah.
That'd be good. Cool. So when it comes to writing tests, it's probably worth taking a quick look at how we've got the project set up. So within the Aikau directory, there's a structure here. We store there are two parts to the test really. There's the model that actually invokes the widget on the test page, and then there's the tests that in turn runs against that model. And so you'll see here the test models themselves are stored within the test apps webimp classes Alfresco site web scripts folder, and the test code itself is just within the test resources folder. And the package structure under those points should mirror the package structure of the widgets themselves. So hopefully you should be able to find everything where you expect to see it. And as Richard said, if you want to go and see the model rendered as the web script to see what's actually being what's available to test against, there's that URL that's by default on port 8089 that you can go visit once you've got the test app running. So everyone's got their own process for developing tests, but I like to start coming up with a very simple page model that I use to write tests against. Now, ideally, you'll just have the widget that you're testing on the page. At the top of this slide, I've got a very simple test model that's from one Martin was looking at recently, the inline edit renderer. And you see where it says test and the pencil icon, that's the inline edit widget, and that's it. Below that's the pub sub that we use for some of the tests. but the only widget on the page there pretty much is that inline edit widget. At the bottom of the slide, there's a slightly more complex example. This is a page model that Richard set up to look at the tab container test. And so that invokes the Alf tab container widget, and you've got several tabs across the top there, each with a different widget in them. And then at the bottom, you've got lots of buttons that the tests can programmatically click on to trigger events. And that's the way we test how the widget interacts with externally triggered events. So you'll probably be familiar with the fact that we use the pub/sub sort of model for communicating across widgets, and using buttons that fire events is a really good way of testing that. And now let's move on to the test code itself. This again is from the inline edit test. I'm using that here because that's the most recent test we've written, and so should theoretically be the best example of our current thinking on what's best practice. But as we've said already, that's a fluid concept really, so bear that in mind. Now we typically use the assert framework that comes with intern. There are other ones available. So there are some examples of us using expect, for instance, but assert, I think it's fair in saying, is the preferred method, and we feel it kind of matches the style of testing that the widgets require. But I think the most important thing is that the tests are readable and reliable. Next up, we've just started using the setup, before each, and teardown methods. So in the setup, you'll see here we load the test web script. There's a test common util class, which you probably won't need to use that much. There's a few useful things in there, but generally the Ledford API that Intern recently switched to makes a lot of sense and gives you most of the methods you'll need to use for actually interacting with the page. So yeah, that's the setup method. We've got the before each method and teardown, and I think there's also a after each method that we haven't needed to use in this test, but that's available.
Just quickly, David, I'll say a couple of the things in terms of the test common. You're sort of in terms of the one of the main things is that where we are looking for data in the pub sublog, the test common has a lot of helper methods for like finding particular items in the for like defining the CSS selectors to find values and things like that. So that's the only other main use we have of it, as well as loading the page and doing the coverage. It's also for finding things in the pub sublog.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. That's a good point. So coming down to the bottom of this slide, another kind of pattern that we started using a bit more recently is breaking the tests up into smaller chunks. So if you look at some of the early tests we wrote, they're typically single tests, a single test per widget with lots of asserts. And that makes it really difficult to debug, with sometimes errors or failures being delayed, so we don't know which assert failed and caused the error. That's why we had to go quite heavily down the route of spitting out a lot of debug logging. So we've moved away from that now and breaking it down into multiple tests per suite, and trying to keep each test to just a single assert. That way, when a test fails, you know exactly what's gone wrong, where it's happened, and it doesn't take down the whole suite. So you still get the subsequent events and tests still happen, and you still get the coverage from those. So that's a really good tip, is keep your tests nice and small. And in terms of the tests themselves, there's pretty much 3 things you need to do for a basic test. First, you need to find the element. Then you call a Ledford method on that element and do something with it. The results of that pass into the then function. We do that because intern's all promise-based, so we need to stick and respect that promise chain. And then once you've got that result, you basically do an assert to check what the value on that is. It's not rocket science, but sometimes it can, and actually getting the values and working out what to test is perhaps the hardest part of writing any test. Something we've had problems with in the past, especially when testing older style share pages, is finding actually getting a handle on the element we want to interrogate. And that's because a lot of the UI code used dynamic IDs, and it wasn't really easy to target that element. But now the way we've set up the Aikau HTML and the fact we've started testing the widgets in isolation, that means it should be really easy to identify and target the elements themselves. You'll see here we're using find by CSS selector. That's not the only method that exists, but it's a pretty good one to start with. If you've got a more simple selector, then finding by ID or class can be slightly quicker. And Ledford does contain methods to use XPaths or link text, and I'd suggest avoiding those. I'm sure Dave will agree with that, because if you're doing things like finding elements by the text displayed in them, and we change the text, then the tests just become fragile and they break quite easily. So we don't want to do that. One thing that is worth remembering is that once you've retrieved an element using something like find by CSS selector, you're then, anything you do after that is then scoped to that element. So things like moving the mouse and clicking, it's all done within the context of that element until you call the .end method, and that then resets the scope. So that's why you'll see it as calling .end quite a few places through the code. And so one of the other really great things you can do with Selenium testing is act exactly like you expect the user to. So within our tests, we've got keyboard interactions and mouse interactions included to ensure that the user can actually use the widgets as we intend them to use them. We found this to be a really good way of actually focusing us as developers on thinking how we expect it to be used and making sure things like keyboard shortcuts don't get forgotten, and that improves the accessibility of our widgets and Share as a whole. So in this example, we're testing how the focus works as example, and we've got both the keyboard test and the mouse tests for that. It's probably worth noting that when it comes to keyboards, we've had a few problems in the past with modifier keys getting stuck down and Selenium not quite clearing the keys after you release them. So there is a method in the test common utils to reset all those, and that's called automatically when we load a web page. So I think since we've done that, we haven't hit that problem with the modifier keys really. The next examples, from a little bit more complex example.
Sorry, David, can I just jump in there? I'm having a problem muting myself there. Regarding the modifier keys, there's a couple of ways of calling modifiers or key presses generally in the Ledford API. One of them is with press keys, which by default doesn't release them. what you can do is you can do a press keys null afterwards. That will release them. If you're actually acting directly on an element, you can do a type, and that will automatically release them. It's all in the API documentation, but just kind of to add that in there.
Cool. Yep. That's good to know. Thanks, Martin. So yeah, back to this. This is the last code example. This is from the PDF.js previewer tests, and gives example of some more involved things you can do with the testings. Things like executing JavaScript directly onto the page. In this particular example, we've needed to add a sleep to wait for that action to complete. But that brings me to the point that you should try and avoid using sleeps wherever possible. That's just a good testing practice in general, because if you're waiting for an arbitrary length of time, then it just slows down the tests. And often, if you find yourself needing to use a sleep, just rethinking about how you've got the tests and perhaps refactoring it to a slightly different approach, you'll be able to get rid of that sleep completely. Another thing you'll see us do, which may not be particularly obvious, is the kind of shortcutting the then success. So the then method takes two callbacks, one for a success handler and one for a failure handler. So if all you care about is whether that CSS element or whether that element with the CSS selector exists, you can stick a null in the success callback and then just assert false in the failure callback, and that saves a bit of code. And the other thing you can see us doing at the bottom of this test is using a local variable to compare before and after states. So you do something, set the value. So here we're setting we're finding the size of the canvas element. We're then doing some zooming on the previewer, and then we're having a look at the size of the element again, and if they're different, so if it was smaller than it is now, then what we've expected to happen has happened, and it's all good. If not, we can throw an error. And so that's that code example. Richard mentioned the code coverage reports that we've got. So this is the latest test reports. As I think they were generated a week ago or so. So I think that's pretty good. There's obviously more we can do, but I think the level of testing we've got now is proof that we're off to a good start. And having these UI tests is really good for us as developers, as it means that we're better able to have confidence in the widgets and the code, and things like refactoring where necessary. Gives us we've got that safety net, and that was useful when we split out the Aikau project from Share, so we were able to do some refactoring without breaking anything. And this code also, these tests are also good for the business, as we can demonstrate to customers that we're testing things like accessibility, and that's the first time we're doing that. And it's quite good for you and the community, because it means that if you're submitting any code to us, you can write tests, prove it works, prove why your code's needed in the product, and it'll help us maintain it in the future. So it's good for everyone, I think.
Yeah, I know that accessibility has always been a big deal for Alfresco, but with Aikau, we've really raised it a notch to full accessible, to be able to access all the capabilities of the product through alternative means. It's very cool.
Yeah, that's certainly the aim. I wouldn't say we're entirely there yet, but
no, that's right. I mean, I think accessibility is like isn't much the same with the testing. It's something we're getting better at all the time, and we're learning all the time. But yeah, one thing I wanted to mention as quickly as well, which I don't know if was about the sort of the data. One of the key things about the testing we're doing is it's completely decoupled. So even when we were running the Aikau test as part of Share, we weren't relying on a repository to be up and running, and the same is true for Aikau. So when it's a standalone project, we're not reliant on Share, we're not reliant upon a repository, and we've got lots of techniques for. So we've got using sign-on. SINON.js as a mocking service, so that enables us to actually test our services which would be going to the repository to get results back. And also because of the nature in which the widgets themselves are decoupled from services, it means that we can actually create mock test services, because we're trying to create that, as well as decoupling widgets from each other, we're trying to decouple widgets from the data. And so you know, David mentioned that we've got a PDF to JS widget. That's something we're porting across, so it's entirely independent from Share and from the UE code and everything like that. And so we're able to actually genuinely load that with a real PDF and genuinely test the the PDF to JS rendering and all the as the test was showing, the zooming and the navigation and everything, and we do the whole thing keyboard and mouse. And so yeah, so this is one of the reasons why the move is taking a little while, is because we're having to remove all of those Share and UE dependencies to make Aikau truly independent for both the testing and for the benefit of moving it forwards.
That's very cool. So I'm going to transition us to the questions, since we're running out of time and we got a whole bunch of questions.
Yeah.
One of the questions, which is related to what you're just talking about, is when you're building a search interface using the new search services, how can you does the mock framework support search? Because we remove loose scenes, so that makes it more difficult on a development side. You have to constantly restart Solar. Any tricks for how to develop how to use a search service as a developer?
So in terms of actually using the real service, we're not actually testing the service. There's unit tests in the repository, and there will be FET test, or should be testing the actual service itself. There is an element of fragility in that where we've done the mocking, we've taken a sample of what the service would be expected to respond. But what we're actually testing is how the UI components interpret and how they render that data. So we don't, it's focusing on what the UI is testing. It's all about the UI as opposed to the end-to-end. So yeah, hopefully that's clear. We only, not that we only care, but we within the the UI team, we are focused, I should say, on the UI part of it, and not whether or not the services are broken.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Ol has a question I'm going to read in its entirety because it provides good feedback, I think. And we've heard it from a number of things. I know it's part of our list we were discussing. He says, what are the plans about planning sprints and roadmaps for Aikau? We're doing heavy Aikau development on a project using the Aikauified document library and other stuff that aren't used by default in Share yet. We're a bit scared these things change a lot, or we don't know about the changes.
Right.
Especially between 5.0a and 5.0c, a lot has changed. How can a developer stay informed and play nicely with the work your team is doing?
Okay, well, that's a good question. So basically, this should be a lot more clear. To start with, everything is completely public and it's on GitHub. So one of the things that we are sort of mandated as a team, which again is why the testing is important, is that Aikau will be backwards compatible going forwards. So we've got this large test coverage. Ensures that every time we make commits, we make sure the tests all pass, and those tests are primarily, at least initially, around function that is in Share. But the Aikau team is working on a 1-week sprint basis, so we're doing very short sprints, and the idea is that at the end of each sprint there will be a new release. So we finished the sprint yesterday, and if you looked on the Nexus repository, the Alfresco Nexus Maven repository, you'll see that there's a 1.03 release. If you look next Wednesday, hopefully you'll see there's a 1.04 release, and so on. So all of these releases will be backwards compatible, and it will be possible to configure Share to and change the POM to upgrade to a newer version and take advantage of those new features. Now there is an outstanding, I will say up front, there's an outstanding question. If you do upgrade the version of Aikau, then you are sort of moving out of of a supported state, I guess. I think that's important to recognise in the same way as if you start changing any of the libraries that come by default. So we will be certifying against particular versions, but you will be at least able to take advantage and see what's coming on a very regular basis. And you will be able to also, as a community member, make contributions. And if they meet the acceptance criteria in terms of tests, you'll be able to. They'll be pulled in and they'll be in the next release. So it should be much more visible what's happening.
So does that imply you'll be doing some of the planning process on GitHub and using which GitHub tools we'll use? Because we use the issue tracker in issues.alfresco.com. You'll stay there.
Yeah, all of those are still there. I think again we're still trying to iron out exactly the process. There's a new Aikau project in Jira which is public. I think I'm fairly certain it's public, so you can actually see the backlog of issues there. I think we prefer, again, I think at the moment we're still working all these things out. I think we prefer community issues to be raised possibly on GitHub. We're not entirely sure yet, or they could be raised on Jira. Like I said, we'll work. We need still to work out the full process for how we sort of track feature requests. Obviously, the priority of things we'll do is we want to service technical debt. So we're trying setting a goal of fixing any bugs at the beginning that are available at the beginning of a sprint, and also servicing internal feature requests. Because obviously our main customer, in terms of us being the Aikau team, our main customer is Alfresco. Obviously, we'd like to service requests from the community as well, or better yet, have those features implemented by the community and then accept them into the project.
Excellent. So one of the questions is how will you handle pull requests on GitHub? Because we have the Alfresco Community Mirror. We do not monitor pull requests there unless they're linked in an issue, because that's what the engineering team follows. But your team will be working directly in GitHub and directly monitoring pull requests there?
Absolutely. In fact, we've so Martin and I are the admins of the Aikau GitHub project, and we actually don't push any of our own code. So we review each other's pull requests. That's the only way code is going in. So David and I don't think Richard's done one yet. Kevin Roast has done one. A few people have started to do one internally. We will review those pull. I'm sure Richard will get one in soon. He's smiling, but it won't be long.
I've got one waiting.
Oh, okay, cool. I look forward to reviewing that. But yeah, so
there isn't a test yet.
Okay, yeah, that's probably has to have a test, otherwise it won't get in. But yeah, we're using pull requests, so we will review pull requests from the community in exactly the same way we review them internally.
Excellent. So one of the questions is Aikau and Share, is Aikau and the rest of Share become more independent? You mentioned the importance of keeping a supported configuration when you're using Alfresco Enterprise, but we've also talked about making Share in the repository more independent, so you can use Share on different versions of the repository.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something we expect to? I guess support is one of those things we're still figuring out. But can you upgrade the repo without upgrading Share, considering that you emphasize backwards compatibility?
Can you upgrade the repo without upgrading Share? I mean, at the moment, I don't. It's difficult, really. It's difficult to say for certainty. I wouldn't like to commit to anything like that. Yeah, I'm going to defer that one to someone with more knowledge. Because if I say something and I say something that's not true, I'll get myself in trouble.
Yeah,
unless anyone else on the panel.
That's not something we're planning on supporting at the moment. Is different versions of Share against old or future versions of the repo, just because of the APIs we use change, and we don't guarantee they stay.
But I can say there's been a lot of discussion internally about this. It's not something we it's just like I said, it's a hard problem to solve.
Yeah, it may change in future.
That makes sense. People often would build UIs on Surf outside of Share. Is Aikau meant to be used in the same way? Can you use it independent of Share?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said, this tutorial that's in the moment it's still in draft. I'm gonna, when we get everything in place, I'll sort of release it early, but it's going to eventually go into the official Alfresco documentation. But what the tutorial does is it starts you off. It uses the Aikau Maven archetype to build you a new standalone client, which is pre-configured to work with a local Alfresco repository, and then it takes you through the process of building out that client. That's completely independent of Share. It's but it's built on top of Surf, and as I said, it's pre-configured. So what you get out of the box is you get a login page, all the authentication stuff's built in, and then you get a home page, and that's it. So all you can actually do with it once you build the client with the archetype, all you can do is log in and out. It's not very exciting, but it gives you a framework to build into, and that's what the tutorial takes you through.
That's excellent. And what are the plans for Aikauifying Share, adopting Aikau more broadly throughout Share, specifically with the document library is a big piece. Dashlets, a lot of
that. I'll feel this. David was to Mike Farn about this the other day, so I'll just say that he'll correct me if he's got more up-to-date information. But I think the main thing is it's not about rewriting exactly what we have now. I think that would be a slightly pointless exercise. We know there's issues with the wiki, we know there's issues with the blog, we know there's improvements that need to be made in the document library. What we need to do is figure out how to move those forwards and then do a better job, improve them, not just rewrite them. I think that's fair, isn't it, David? Or would you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's not going to be a straight swap out. It's something we're looking at. So all new development work on Share is going to be Aikau. We can say that, but yeah, in terms of swapping out old components, we're not going to do it. Just pure swap out. We're going to look at it as a kind of rethinking things as we as we convert to Aikau.
Yeah, and there's certainly there's been a few efforts in the area. I mean, Richard did a prototype of a new version of the blogs. I've worked on one for the document library. There was a blog post that I did looking at the data list one, so it's certainly possible. It's not difficult, but again, it's like we want to add some value in as well as just doing a simple rewrite.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So one of the comments for Office Hours a couple weeks ago was that Share doesn't reuse widgets as much as it should. I went through examples like the People Finder. And the person asked the question said, but I noticed Aikau does a much better job at reuse. And I think the response is, thanks for noticing.
Yeah, I think there's not really not a question in there, but it is basically that's the entire point of Aikau, is that we don't want to keep reinventing the wheel. Every time we do a new page, write something once, use it all the time, and then I said this at Summit. The idea is that if we write a widget and we put it into a page, and then we make some updates as we're doing another page, then we bring the rest of the application forwards. You won't get the effect you see in Share as you navigate through Share. It's almost like archaeology. You can sort of pull back the layers of which developer was working on it at which time, and popular techniques and that kind of stuff. So it's all about consistency. So modularization, consistency, accessibility, testing, all these things. These are this is what's really driving us.
Excellent. So where's the best places to get documentation for Aikau?
Okay, so it's coming. I will say that I know there's been, so I will. I'd like to say, so one of the things we're doing at the moment is David said we're sort of tidying up some of the modules, we're doing a bit of refactoring here and there. So I want to make sure the tutorial is up to date with the latest, version of the code. I would say that it'll all be out 2 to 3 weeks maybe, and I think that's when you can probably expect to start using it. I think by that point we'll have done a couple more sprints. The infrastructure will be in place. We'll have sorted out all the dependencies and everything like that, and then that'll be a good time. So it's on the way. That's the best I can say at the moment. It won't be too long.
I did notice that in the official docs, the official documentation at docs.alfresco.com, there is a section on Aikau. So that's really useful. It does link into the widget docs that's hosted in the Alfresco developer resources. David Webster pointed out that the wiki page on the Aikau framework is up to date pretty much. It has a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
And then blogs.alfresco.com, both David Webster's blog and Dave Draper. I think you guys blog under the developer blog. Yeah, lots of good stuff there. There is an official issue to get an Aikau project, to get 16 AKU-16 at issues.alfresco.com. to officially publish the JavaScript documentation for Aikau and do it as part of the build process. So we've had those discussions. That work has not yet been scheduled, but we understand it's important.
Yeah, and when this goes now, you can build. It's very easy. There's a grunt command. If you just do grunt JS doc, it'll build the latest version of the JS doc from what you've got checked out.
Excellent tip. Excellent. That's the list. I think we made it all through, and we are at the hour. I know you guys are getting ready to go home for the day.
I am home.
Excellent. Any last information that you think that we missed that you think you need to cover?
No, I'm not sure. I don't think so. David, you got anything you think that's worth adding?
No, just to let people know that we're listening to feedback and input, and let us know any comments or improvements and pull requests.
Yeah.
Good stuff like that. Keep it coming in.
Excellent. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time. Welcome to the team, Martin. Glad for your contributions, Richard. And thank you for participating in Tech Talk Live. I'm sure we'll have you guys on again. So if anybody has follow-up questions, feel free to post them to the event page. I'll notice those and let the team know if there's something we need to answer. If you have questions for the Order of the Bee, independent group that works with Community Edition, then please submit those either on the event page in Google Plus or community@alfresco.com. Very interested to know what you would like to know, and we'll get the slides posted, somewhere, speaker deck or SlideShare, and we'll link to them in the show notes on YouTube. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Okay. Cheers.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.